Hey y'all, Casey Kasem here, bringing you a brand new episode of Get Real. This is one of those episodes I thought I lost, but guess what? Here it is, and I got to talk with Scott Pianowski of Yahoo Sports. On this episode, we got to talk about all kinds of stuff, including music, his book recommendations, the process of finding out what you're good at, his thoughts on the Start Your Studs mantra, and a ton more. Give Scott a follow on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. You can find me on Twitter at DKCKasem. You can also find my writing with the Fantasy Footballers. You can follow this pod's Twitter at GetReal_pod. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. Go check out those podcasts. They're all super rad, and make sure that you're subscribed. I really appreciate everybody who listens. I really do, from the bottom of my heart. But now I'm going to go ahead and give you the conversation I had with Scott Pianowski. Hello. That work? I think we got it.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Yeah. Hopefully. Well, never had that happen before, so.
Yeah. I can break any technology.
Yes. You are the one to do it. Nobody else. But, I haven't used StreamYard that much, so there's all kinds of new stuff I'm learning about it.
I've been really, it's good that you're doing all this stuff yourself. I've been really spoiled with the Yahoo stuff that we do. We have producers and stuff, which on one hand, it's great that they do it, but I feel like, I'm so behind the learning curve. If I ever need to do this myself, I just know so little about it.
Well, that's why I didn't want to do it in the first place, because I was like, man, that means I have to learn how to do stuff, and I don't want to do that. But it's not too bad. But I'm really excited to get you to come on.
Me too.
Talk to a couple of your folks over there at Yahoo, and so I get the third one on now. I had Matt was on, and I also had Andy on last week, I think. So
great.
Yeah. So this podcast, a lot of people listen to it because they want to get to know you, which is the reason why I started it. Obviously, is there's people behind, the Jason Schwartzman avatars and, So the first question that I ask everyone is basically, how did you get started playing fantasy football in the first place?
Fantasy football. Well, I started playing fantasy baseball in, I guess it was the late 80s, which dates a little bit how old I am. And I didn't even know that fantasy football existed. Rotisserie baseball is what they called it. And I was always fascinated by statistics. I grew up collecting baseball cards. I grew up reading annuals. I always thought it was cool, like when somebody would score 100 runs or drive in 100 runs or strike out 300 guys or something. Round numbers were always interesting to me. And when I saw that rotisserie baseball was the thing, I'm like, oh, this is great. But I never, it sounds silly now, but I never thought, I've always been a fan of all sports. I never thought, no, they should do this for other sports. And then in the early 90s, I heard that there was a fantasy football league, and there was a health club in my hometown, which I used to go to as kind of a social member. I never actually worked out there, but they had like a lounge and a bar, and I used to hang out there and play pool sometimes or have a couple of drinks or whatever. And they were running a fantasy football league. I thought, oh, okay, I guess they have fantasy football. I didn't know that. And I quickly saw just how perfect fantasy is for football, because the big complaint with fantasy baseball is that it takes a lot of time. You got to be engaged every day. And although, heck, in the COVID year, I think we all saw how important it was to be up on news. News could break at any time in 2020. It's a very unusual nuance to this year. And I think it was kind of stressful to a lot of people, but I quickly saw how great fantasy football was, how it was just more accessible for more people. You didn't have to pay attention that many days of the week. And while a fantasy baseball season was, 6 months daily, let's just chip away at what my standing means and all that. In fantasy football, everything would happen basically on Sunday. So I was going to sports bars. That's back when nobody, I didn't have DirecTV or anything. I'd go to a sports bar, but wow, I can watch all these games at the same time and see all this stuff happen. I was obsessed with it. To be honest with you, I still love fantasy. I'm thrilled that I make a career in it, but I don't think anything can match how much I loved it like in the 90s. That Sunday was so sacred to me. I would never, the whole day was blocked off. Everybody knew that don't invite me to anything on a Sunday. I'm not going to come. And I remember the end of every Sunday, I would think, I can't wait until next week. I still enjoy it. to a very high level. I think it's a great game. I think the
Mhm.
community is awesome. I love
Yeah.
that I've made a career out of this, but it's kind of like I mean, if you fall in love with something when you're younger, I think maybe that holds a little bit more charm in your mind, or a little bit more. There's just something. There's a special nuance to it. So to me, I fell in love with the game in the '90s. Since then, it's been. Yeah. Also, I think we have to tie ourselves to. We have to try to appreciate. We're all competitive. We all want to win.
Mhm.
In the early days, I had a really high win rate because people didn't really know how to play yet. If you could get a little bit of information, I was online back then when a lot of people weren't. One year, a friend of mine said, "Hey, please draft Randy Moss this year." I know most teams don't use 3 receivers, but he's going to go crazy. That would never be an advantage you'd have today. We're in the
Yeah.
information age where even the weakest owner in your league has a lot of information and can get
Mhm.
really good guidance. So, maybe that colors my '90s experience a little bit because I was winning all the time. It was just crazy what my ROI was, but and that's gone down a lot now because there's just too many smart people out there, and
Mhm.
the people in your league are going to get information somewhere that's probably pretty good and usable. But that's a very long answer. I don't give short answers.
No, that's totally fine. I want you to do all the work. I just just ask the questions and you can do all the heavy lifting.
So anyway, yeah. So fantasy football came into my life in the early '90s. I guess that's the sentence in the period.
So with fantasy baseball and fantasy football, when they overlap, how chaotic is that, or is it something that you've learned to manage?
Oh, it's very chaotic. You say learn to manage, and one thing I think I've gotten a lot better at in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years is I calendar everything now. I have all
Mhm.
my fab cadences set up into my online calendar, and I try to do my bidding at the same time every week, and I try to be a creature of routine, and that's a lot better than, I'll get to it when I get to it. I'll remember it when I remember it. I mean, that's 20 years ago. That's how I lived life. If you invited me on this podcast 20 years ago, if this podcast existed, I would have been like, okay, what's early, we're going to tape a show in January. I'll remember that something will jar my, that's a
Yeah, right.
stupid way. That does not work. Certainly doesn't work for me. So as you talk about fantasy seasons overlapping, September is hard. It's the money time for fantasy baseball. You still need to be engaged. A lot of my leagues have daily transactions too, which is not for everybody, but it requires a lot of attention. And I'll even have reminders set on Sunday to set my fantasy baseball lineup because we're so football centric on Sunday
Yeah.
that it's easy to forget. I got to check to make sure that the Dodgers didn't rest Mookie Betts today or something. I get them out of my lineup. So it requires a lot of planning, a lot of just charting things out, writing things down, putting things in calendars. I think that really helps to maintain sanity. I want to say one other thing too that helps a lot. On Sundays, I try really hard. It's not easy to do, but you settle in, the games kick off, somebody scores a touchdown, like say the tight end sleeper you liked in week 15 scores a touchdown 10 minutes into the game, and you get all excited. Oh my God, how many places did I play this guy? Was he in my DFS lineups?
Yeah.
Did I start him in that one league? I was thinking about it. Try not to do that. Make your good decisions, put your lineup out, and then
Mhm.
check the scores. I don't know, halfway through the day, at the end of the day, whatever it is. Don't be trying to chase, how am I doing 15 minutes in? You're just going to drive yourself crazy, and you're going to miss so much of what's fun about the day.
Yes, I was going to ask you about your Sunday when it comes to football. If we were to just sit down with you, or just a common man was to sit down with you and watch football with you on the weekend, how is that experience?
Yeah, so I have 2 TVs in my office, which when I did it, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I felt like I was going to the moon. Now I know there are people who have, multiple TVs. They may incorporate one of their computers or a handheld for another screen. I may go back. I used to be a sports bar guy for a lot of years because I wanted to have a chance to see everything all at once.
Mhm.
One of my TVs I have set up on that 8 box that DirecTV offers, but the TV isn't big enough where I can only kind of sense what's going on in that game. I can't really watch it closely enough.
Mhm.
So I'll have that on one of my TVs. I'll have Red Zone usually on one of the other TVs. I'll bounce into games if they specifically interest me. I'm still tinkering on this setup. I'm still wondering, what would be the best thing? Would I be better served with 3 or 4 TVs? I think if I had 8 TVs in a room, I think I'd be a little bit too head on a swivel, and I wouldn't be getting anything out of it. I'm on Twitter a lot during Sunday. I try to monitor that. The problem with Twitter is that once I start dipping in, I get engaged in other things people say. I get in conversations. Sometimes I get in an argument, and then I look up. I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened? Well, what have I not seen in the last 15 minutes because I've been typing? And haven't we learned, as great as technology is, it's enabled us to have careers, to enable, people like you and I who never would have met, 20, 30 years ago. How could I meet somebody who lives halfway across the country?
Right.
Now I'm able to meet people like this, become friends with people, engage with that. That's awesome. But I think we all know that another really important part of life, to live it in a satisfying way, is sometimes you just have to turn the computer off. You have to put the phone down. You have to log off Twitter and just let the world, let the week breathe a little bit, because if I'm on Twitter all day, people will be saying to me 15 minutes in, how come Hollywood Brown doesn't have a target yet? What's going on? What's up with the Ravens? Did so-and-so get hurt? If you get bunkered down in that all day, it's just going to make sure that you don't enjoy anything. So a big challenge for me on game day is just try to watch what's going on and just try to enjoy what's happening. You're going to get a ton of stuff wrong. Don't sweat that. You're going to have regret. 1 week I played Irv Smith when Logan Thomas was the play. The next week I played Logan Thomas when Irv Smith was the play. That's just the way fantasy goes. Sometimes you can't be tricked up by that. The athleticism of the game has never been better. We can watch everything now. Back in the old, I'm old enough to remember when you just watched what was on, CBS on at 4:00. You watched if they showed the Dallas Washington game. That's what you watched, and everything else was like highlights at halftime or periodic look-ins every 30 minutes or something. Now we can watch anything we want, and I just try to appreciate how great that is. And yet, you can't try to watch everything because then you'll end up watching nothing.
Exactly, and the screen thing is the same for me. I can't get off my phone, and then my wife's like, "I thought you were watching the game. If you're not watching the game, then I can turn it off." No. So yeah. So how did you get started in the fantasy industry? I know that you're a multi-sports guru. You've got your hand in a bunch of different things, but how did you get involved with fantasy sports in the first place?
So I went to college, not really sure what I wanted to do. I was really good at math in high school, like the math that's really not that hard, like algebra. The first year of calculus I thought was pretty easy. I had really good teachers, by the way. Maybe that was it. So, and my math SAT was higher than my verbal SAT. Not that anybody cares about. Do people even take the SATs anymore? I'm not even sure about that. So I went to college thinking maybe math is my thing. Yeah. And then I got to college math, and a month in, I'm like, math is not my thing. I'm good at math. I'm good at being in the grocery store and estimating how much money I've already spent. I'm good at stuff like that, or just general problem solving. I'm not a space scientist. I'm not good at the chaos math. I'm not Will Hunting or anything like that. I'm not anywhere close to that. So I thought, well, what do I want to do? I thought I was going to be a math person. Of course, the great thing is at 18, you don't know what you're going to be. And in my case, I didn't know what I was going to be at 22 or 25. I had done some sports. I always loved sports. Grew up reading Sports Illustrated. Grew up reading the Boston Globe, which was unbelievable in my childhood. The 1980s Boston Globe. Peter Gammons, Will McDonough, Jackie McMullen, who's still around doing great work. She's awesome. It goes on and on. They had a murderer's row of great writing. So I got involved a little bit in sports writing as a high school kid. I wrote for a weekly newspaper. I even wrote an article on fantasy baseball one year. Didn't really take it that seriously. I just knew I liked to talk about sports. I like to read sports. So I was a reasonably solid writer. I don't know. So I got involved with that. And then at the school I went to, which doesn't have a journalism program, I went to Providence College. If you wanted to be involved in the school paper, all you really had to do was have initiative. Say, oh, I wanted to cover something. I showed up one day and said, do you have any sports that need covering? Yeah, nobody covers the baseball team. Okay. So I'll go watch a bunch of baseball games in 48-degree weather. That sounds like fun. And the next year, the guy covered the hockey team and graduated. I'd become friends with him. He told me, he basically pushed me to get the hockey job. I got that. I started covering college basketball. So by the end of my college experience, I was really into sports writing. I started writing for some local papers that led to a bigger opportunity with the Providence Journal. So I get done with school thinking, I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be a newspaper writer, newspaper reporter. And for about, 10 years or so, that's what I did. Bounced around to a couple different papers, was making somewhat of a living, not a great living, for a chunk of those years I was living at home, the classic living in the parents' basement. Although I think they gave me upstairs living for a while, but I eventually migrated to the basement like all good internet writers do. So I'm covering sports and fantasy's going on. And I remember at one of the newspapers I wrote for, I went to my editor. I said, this fantasy thing is really taking off. This would be a great article. I'd love to write this. I don't really need a lot of money for it. You could pay me just a stipend. I would do it. And he never quite pulled the trigger on it. But as I said, I was online early. I had Prodigy when a lot of people didn't have online services. I basically hamstrung my family's phone for about 3 or 4 years, before I eventually accepted I had to have another line, because I wanted to be online constantly.
Yeah.
For the discussions, for the access to information, the idea that you could see a box score while a game was in progress, that to me was like landing on the moon. And I started to see online fantasy sites, blossom. I got to be friends with John Hansen, who y'all probably know from starting Fantasy Guru. He's still a very prominent member of the industry. He does a lot of great work on Sirius XM. He has a show on DirecTV, one of the pillars of our industry. I got to know him in the mid to late 90s. He gave me some work. I got to know the RotoWire guys right when they were figuring out, hey, giving out fantasy information is like a viable website idea. It's a viable career idea. I got to know them in the late 90s. I think the first thing they gave me was the Vancouver Canucks to cover. All great fantasy careers start with the Vancouver Canucks probably. But I was just so into it. I had so much time. And, back then, I was doing newspaper stuff. Occasionally when that wasn't as steady as I wanted to be, I did a little bit of temping. And I'd be at my temp job doing RotoWire work, or checking sports scores, or basically trying to pretend that I was doing my job and I really wasn't, because I wanted to pick up a closer for the Rockies, or I wanted to see who was going to be the tight end for the Vikings or something like that. So the internet and fantasy kind of exploded at the right time for me. And by the middle 90s, I was augmenting my salary and my career with fantasy work. By the late 90s, I had a full-time offer to work for RotoWire. And so that's basically what I've done for the last 2 decades. I worked for Hansen full-time for a while, RotoWire full-time for a while. I got the Yahoo job in 2008. And that's basically what I've done for the last 20 years.
That's super awesome. Yeah, I feel like there's not enough hours in the day when I'm at work, when all I'm doing is thinking about what can I, talk about or write about or whatever. And then, nope, you still have 8 more hours of work. You just got there. So, no, I totally get that. So when you got found and everything, you were talking about how you came up with the internet right when you got in on the ground floor, basically. Mm-hmm. And were you on forums and message boards at that time, or how were you getting your information from other fans of fantasy?
Yeah, when I was at Prodigy, I was on a lot of message boards. I mentioned earlier the Randy Moss thing. I got to be really good friends. I should say the guy's name, Dan Williamson. I've been really good friends for, 25 years. He's now doing a lot of great work with Dynasty Leagues. That's kind of his main thing, although he's an excellent. Dan Williamson's just a great player in all formats. He's been in a bunch of my seasonal leagues. So I spent a lot of message board time on Prodigy. I'm sure a lot of people are listening to, I have no idea. When I say Prodigy, they have no idea what. Isn't he like a rapper or something? I mean, that was an online service. That was back then where, a lot of people had AOL. You would go into Barnes & Noble. They'd hand you the free disc. You could get AOL for free for a month or whatever it was.
Yep.
And I remember the first time when I first had Prodigy, a 2400 modem. I remember ESPN was first fooling around with their first version of a website. And I tried to load the ESPN Sports Zone page, whatever they called it. I mean, it took like 5 minutes to load. And I remember thinking to myself, why would anybody go to this site? It just takes too freaking long. I had no idea that my modem was as slow as it was. At one point, I got a job where they had a T1 line, and I saw what a real web page loading was like instantaneous. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta get this in my house as soon as possible. I could not. It's interesting. I mean, a lot of people probably listening, watching, who grew up with the internet, who grew up with technology. It was really something for people who didn't have that, who to see what it felt like. Like when I first got to a newsroom, I worked for the Province Journal when I was still in college in the early 90s. Is basically an intern position. They didn't call it that, but they gave me as many hours as they could without me being a full-time employee. A great place to learn. So many people there were really nice to me. I didn't really know what I was doing, but a lot of people helped me out. And I kind of learned my way through trial and error. And at the Journal, they would have the AP wire where you would do this big string of stories, and you would see, the Red Sox Yankees game just ended. I can immediately see the game story. I can immediately see the box score. This again was landing on the moon for me. I was used to the next morning reading box scores, and your newspaper might not even have the score. It might just say late game, because the paper had to be put to bed at such an early hour and stuff like that. So I used to hang around the Journal and just read the AP wire, which was like the internet before the internet. And we could send messages on computer. We basically send each other inter-office emails. We didn't call it. I forget what we called it, but email didn't exist. Email wasn't the thing. But the idea that I could send a computer message to one of my coworkers and say, "Oh, I'm going to be late tomorrow. I have to go to the dentist. I'm coming in at 5:00 or something." That to me was like the coolest freaking thing. And now it's like we take it for granted now. That we can text each other at any point. We can email each other. We can call each other if that's still of interest to people. So the newspaper game was really good to me. The AP wire was awesome back then, but I hit the timing was good for me. I don't even remember what the original question was. I'm just babbling here, but
I enjoy this. I don't think I remember.
Yeah, I just feel lucky. That I came around when I did. Where I still get sad, when I see magazines kind of drying up. I grew up with Sports Illustrated being one of the most important things in my life, and they're still kind of figuring out what they are now. The magazine doesn't come out weekly anymore. That makes me very, very sad. But we have access to more information than ever. And the great thing is if somebody, and I'm sure you've no doubt talked about this before, and then, pillars of the industry will talk about this. Matthew Berry will talk about this all the time. If you want to be in this industry now, it's never been easier to get yourself out there. Start a blog, start a podcast, start accumulating a following on Twitter, find something that you're passionate about, put your work out there. And if it's good, people will gravitate towards it. It's a very glutted space, so this it's obviously competitive, but the barriers for entry have never been as low as they are right now. Where in the old days, there just weren't that many jobs to do it, and if you didn't get one of those jobs, then okay, well, good luck. I hope you win your league. Maybe we'll have something for you in 3 years. But now, if you have a little bit of interest and a lot of passion, you can become. So many people have started with just about nothing and given no inside track to stuff. But they've just said, look, I'm going to put out a good product and then people will care about it. The Barry story is well known. He was working for Roto World. They weren't paying him a lot of money at the time. He wanted a small raise. They didn't give it to him. He said, well, I'm just going to do this on my own. And I'm going to throw all my passion into it. The guy had a job as a Hollywood, script writer, Hollywood writer, but he was more passionate about fantasy. It was more interesting to him than his day job. And if you are passionate about anything and you throw yourself into it, within reason. If I wanted to be an NBA player, I probably wasn't going to do it. It doesn't matter how many 3-pointers I shot. I'm never going to be Steph Curry. But in fantasy, if you care about it, if you have a little bit of ability and it's something that you're passionate about, there are ways to get your toe in the door and build a following and become part of the industry.
So, how important do you think Twitter has been for fantasy football, fantasy baseball, and the community and the industry as a whole?
It's gigantic. I think it's as much a game changer as anything, because it's a way to brand yourself. It's a way to meet people. It's a way to get your work out there. It's a way to get information. I still think Twitter's pretty great. There's been a little bit of a backlash with Twitter the last few years, and I get it. Now you've been around long enough. There are great people you interact with. There's some people who are just going to be trolls. There are just some people. Somebody today was giving me crap for something I said a year ago about Josh Allen. It's like it was a year ago, and you know what? If you told me the moment I posted that you thought it was a bad take, I would respect that. To wait a year where it looks bad now, although to be fair, it probably looked bad 2 months ago. But Josh Allen, I wasn't really sure that he'd ever be a great player a year ago, and now, man, he's probably going to finish second or third in the MVP vote, and if not for Rodgers, I think Allen legitimately could win it. I'm really excited about where Buffalo might go in the playoffs. I don't know exactly when this is going to come out. By the time you listen to this, maybe Buffalo's already been eliminated.
Or you were calling it, you called your shot before we even knew it was going to happen. But it'll come out probably after, sad.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think Twitter's great because I think there's a lot of information on Twitter. I think there's, and it's just cool. Like I grew up reading Judy Blume's books when I was an adolescent. One day I sent a tweet and just told Judy Blume, your books were like basically a second mother to me. You're awesome, and you get to tell people. I've had some interactions with, I'm maybe it's a stretch to say I'm friends with Brian Koppelman, but he follows me on Twitter. He's the showrunner of Billions. He famously wrote Rounders with his co-writer David Levine. I've had some interactions with him. I've talked about Elvis Costello with Brian Koppelman. We've talked about rock music. We've talked about a lot of different things, and these were conversations that were never going to happen 20 or 30 years ago. You know, I was never going to meet Martin Scorsese. You know, I was never going to meet Steven Spielberg or something. But it's just a great. It makes the world smaller, and it exposes us to a lot more social possibility. That's good. Again, the key is to keep in perspective, not get too down when somebody gives you a hard time. There are always going to be some negative people, and you have to be okay with that. I went years before I ever blocked anybody. Yeah. And then sometimes I just realize now, hey, some people just want to be a jerk to you. You have to block them. You have to mute them. You have to look the other way.
Right.
And you have to remember that for as many people who may give you crap over something you get wrong or just want to get your goat or try to bait you into something, there are always going to be people who love your work. And a lot of them you'll never hear from. There's just a silent majority that engages you, follows you, puts value on you, but maybe they just never get around to telling you that. And that's okay. I mean, as long as you modulate it, don't spend 24 hours on Twitter. At times I've been guilty of spending most of my day on Twitter. I need to, when I go golfing, I need to just put my phone off and just, check on it, every couple hours to make sure nothing emergency like has happened. But, for the most part, I think Twitter is a very positive experience. And I think it's been other than the internet itself, I think it's been the biggest game changer for fantasy.
Yeah, I would agree. I always say it's Twitter and then Scott Fishbowl, just like branching off of Twitter, like the interactions and everything with people based on, what division you're in and so on and so forth.
He's awesome. Scott Fish is fantastic. The idea that I'm going to take everybody who is in this industry, and I don't care if you work for the biggest website or the smallest website, if you're legitimately doing this, I want you in my contest. And then I'm going to mix in people who are just, quote unquote, regular Joes. They're going to be in it. And there are a few celebrity, owners. Yeah. I'm a huge REM fan. Mike Mills is in the Fishbowl, and I was so jealous of my friend Pat Fitzmaurice, just a great guy, by the way, FF Fitzy. He's a big REM fan too. He was in Mike Mills's Fishbowl division, so they had a private DM group set up, and Mills was participating in it, which I just thought was awesome. And Scott Fish is he's got a big heart. He's got. And not just that, but he's so creative, right? The way he sets up the scoring, the way he says, look, this idea of playing fantasy with the first 15 picks or 12 running backs, no, that's not. and if that's the way you want to play with a standard league where running back dominates, I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, play whatever way you like. I've been saying a lot the last few weeks, some people want to get rid of tight end. I think that's a big mistake. I think that makes the game less interesting. But if that's what you want to do, I'm not here to tell you. If you get 11 people with you and they want to play the same way, that's fine. Do it that way. But I look at Scott Fish, who's the dreamer. He's got such a big heart. He's inclusive. He wants to get more people access. He wants to get more people the platform they deserve. And he wants to build this wide community. He's obviously done a lot for charity with all the fantasy care stuff. I mean, he's Scott Fish. If you don't know Scott Fish and you hear all these nice things about him, they're all merited. He's just a really great guy. And I can't say enough of how much I just like that he's in our industry and that he's a friend of mine.
Yeah, same. I mean, he's been so just helpful and someone I can talk to as well, because he started off, at the bottom, quote unquote, as some people like to say, just up and coming, and just to see his rise has been crazy. So, speaking of rising up in the industry, how did you get this gig with Yahoo that you have, and how long have you been with them?
Yeah, well, I started with, I guess the RotoWire full-time thing started in the late 90s. I moved to LA just in time for the internet to go broke, to go belly up, the big .com 2000 crash. So I got there just in time for that, Yeah. Timing is everything. If you got to Seattle in the early 90s, you got to see Nirvana. If you got to LA around 2000, you got to see the internet go broke because people really weren't sure how to monetize it and what to do with it.
Yeah.
But I was there at RotoWire. They've been really good to me too. Worked for them full time for a while. I had previously, before I went to RotoWire, I'd been not a full time employee, but employee of John Hansen. I eventually went back to Fantasy Guru for a few years, and Hansen and Brandon Funston, another guy I have just nothing but great things to say about. Brandon Funston's a really solid person who's been very, very good to me. And so was John Hansen, by the way. He gave me a chance when I was a total nobody, and I want to say I appreciate that. And his success speaks for itself. Well, Hansen and Funston had a good relationship. Yahoo would use some of the Fantasy Guru stuff, so my articles occasionally would show up on Yahoo as specialty Yahoo and everything. And eventually, an opening came up at Yahoo, and I got to know Brandon, and I think I'd seen him at one of the industry events that John might have sent me to. I don't think Brandon ever remembered meeting me the first time, which is good. At least I didn't, I didn't do anything embarrassing to take me out of the running. But they had an opening in the mid 2000s, and I think it was 2008. I went to California. I got interviewed by the whole car wash. I think everybody who worked at Yahoo interviewed me at that point, and they talked about wanting to hire me. It still took another like 4 to 6 months, but by the middle of 2008, they hired me, and Funston said, "Look, we're starting you on this baseball blog. It's your thing. Just go do it. Here's how you publish a story. Just go. I'm throwing you in the pool. Start swimming." And he's been great. Awesome guy. It still makes me a little sad that he's still not at Yahoo. He's been with The Athletic for a few years, but I got to Yahoo at 2008. And again, a big thanks to the exposure I got from RotoWire, the exposure I got from Fantasy Guru and John Hansen. Without that, Yahoo probably would have had no idea who I was.
That's great to have those mentors and those guys that are there that can listen to you and give you guidance is just great to have. What kind of advice do you have for people who are looking to start writing, and there's an influx of new sites that have popped up over the last few years? What kind of advice do you have to people who are looking for the right fit? What kind of things should they be looking for in a site that they want to write for?
That's a great question. The first thing is ask yourself why do you want to be a fantasy writer or a fantasy analyst in the first place? Is it something you're passionate about? Is it something you're prepared to do where you might be underpaid or undercompensated for a long time? The early returns I got, I think the first thing I did for Roto, I didn't want to say how much I got when I first started working for RotoWire. I wasn't doing a lot for them, but I wasn't getting a lot for it either. That's just, it's kind of the, it's a lot of things, a lot of gigs you put your toe in, and you're trying to prove that you have value. And if you prove it, then they'll give you more work. They'll give you more compensation. So my first thing I would implore people is, do it because you care about it. You're passionate about it. It's fun to do. A lot of times people will say to me, I was writing these articles anyway, like on my league webpage, when I was playing fantasy baseball in the 90s, I used to do this weekly wrap up that I would send out to everybody. I just wrote it for fun. It wasn't anything anybody paid me for. It's just a way for us to all kind of make fun of each other and share community. So do it because you love it. And then ask yourself, it's not a problem if you want to do something that's already in the fantasy space. You just think you can do it really well. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also important to ask yourself, what isn't being served in the fantasy space? What is it? Are you a really good IDP player? And you think, I think there could be better IDP content. Or, again, I back to my friend Dan Williamson. He saw an opportunity in the Dynasty League space to maybe get a toehold in it. And he's gotten a full foothold in it now. Maybe best ball is your thing. Maybe you want to write about that. You want to write obviously DFS is still relatively new. It's only been around, I don't know, maybe 10 years, 8 years, something like that. There's openings there. We've never been in a more prime space for gaming, for handicapping, for wagering. It's becoming more and more popular and accepted all around the country. I think eventually it's going to be something that everybody can do in all 50 states. You can probably do it on your phone at some point in the next few years. So maybe there's an opening there if handicapping the games is more something you're interested in, or player props is something you're interested in. So ask yourself, what is it that I care about? What is it that maybe isn't getting served that I think I can do a really good job at? Not to be discouraged if what you want to do is something you see a lot of other people doing. You have a unique voice. And that's another thing I would really implore people to do is I think you should read everybody you like and respect. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you should write like Brad Evans. You should write like Andy Behrens. You should write like Matt Berry. You should write like you. If those guys influence you, that's great. But, you have to find what your own voice is and what your own style is. Some people are minimalists. They may lead a story with 5 words and jump right into it. A lot of times Matthew's stories are going to have 15, 20 paragraphs of a story before they jump into it. There's no really right or wrong answer, but just try to cultivate your own voice. I think that's really important for any kind of writer, but especially in fantasy. People can influence you, but just try to make sure that you're putting your own stamp, and it's going to take time. You're going to have ebbs and flows to that. There's an old writer expression that anytime a writer looks at anything they wrote a long time ago, or even like a few months ago, you're petrified you're going to hate it. And if you read it and it doesn't make you want to light yourself on fire, you're pleasantly surprised. I just look at some of the things I wrote, in college or in my early newspaper days, or even just I'm capable of writing anything lousy just a few years ago. It's a learning experience, but try to find what space you think you make sense in. If you think there's an underserved space, that could be a great opportunity. And although you should, read and expose yourself to a lot of different voices and writing and styles, make sure you're cultivating your own voice at the end of the day.
Yes, exactly. Because, there's so many people out there. Having your own thing that stands out. And when people are looking at articles, they're not always reading the entire article. So make sure that you have something there that, is your own thing that'll stand out when they're skimming through. And then they'll be like, hey, I want to keep reading this. This is cool.
You hit a key word, by the way, skim.
Yeah.
I think we have to assume that most people skim. We live in a skim world, right? That's why Twitter's so popular, because a tweet, you can read the whole tweet because it only takes a few seconds. But in the whole joke now, right? The too long didn't read. Sometimes when I write a long piece, I'll actually put the too long didn't read at the beginning. Like I say, look, this is the gist of this article. If you have 10 seconds, this is what I'm trying to say. Now, if you actually want how I got there, read the rest of the piece. But that's a great point. And that's also why, in the newspaper game, they would talk about, get your thrust up front, the important stuff. Don't bury the lead. Don't take the main thing you wanted to say and leave it in paragraph 11. So with the understanding that your readers may not be, or your podcast listeners may not be engaged for the full A to Z experience, if you have something that's a main thrust, get it out there. If nothing else, tease it early on. Let them know it's coming. And if you can get it out there early in the show or early in the article, all the better. Don't bury the lead.
That's great advice. And I was talking to TJ Hernandez on here about that too. I just asked him, I said, do people read? Do people still read? I mean, I write, but it's something to think about. You really need something that'll, get to the point at the beginning, like you said, and then have your, good stuff within that article.
You mentioned TJ Hernandez, which jogs my mind for a couple of reasons. One, I just love his work.
His
awesome. Process, his style, everything about TJ Hernandez I am in favor of. But it also, his path, he was a poker player, right? Mm-hmm. This is a guy who understood game theory, understood probability, understood risk-reward ratios, and understood what upside and pot odds look like. And he's applied those theories to fantasy. And that's such a great, I think, just idea of, you may be from an economics background. I mean, think of how much I took some economics electives in college. I even dabbled with majoring in it for a second until, again, I realized that maybe it was a little bit too big of a bite for me to make. But there's so much application, even if you just know like basic economic theory and like what does opportunity cost mean, or what is diminishing returns, stuff like that. That so many economic theories have application in life, have application in decision making, have application in fantasy. And in the case of TJ, he saw overlap. Like, I'm a poker player. This is a skill set. This is all these things that add to my skill set in poker, make me a good poker player, make me a good decision maker in poker. Wow, these things really translate to fantasy. Not that his pieces are all written from a poker slant, but I think he was smart to realize that there's an overlap in those two things, and that a lot of his skills, what made him a really good poker player, would also make him a really good fantasy player. I just want to say enough. If you're not that knowledgeable on who TJ is, I think the world of that guy. I really love his work, his approach, and his style. I can't say enough how much it's hit home with me.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy to hear his story, and sometimes things aren't always going to be there for you. Online poker got ripped out from underneath him, so he was able to use his skills, like you said, to translate over. So it's pretty cool how you can think on your feet like that.
Absolutely. And it just also, you don't know what your story is going to be. Again, I went to college as a math major. I had no idea I'd have a writing career, a journalism career. I had no idea that fantasy sports could be a career. Nobody thought that
right
when I was in school. So, stay open-minded. And also, I think about when I finally started taking journalism classes, even though they didn't have a journalism program, you could dabble in it kind of. And I went to a couple of journalism seminars in college. And I remember one of the guys I talked to, I wish I could remember the person's name. He was an editor at the Miami Herald. And it was a seminar on sports writing. And he said, I can't say enough how important it is to read everything. Not literally everything written, but read things outside of sports.
Yeah.
Be up on pop culture, be up on music, be up on history, be up on what's going on in the world. That's not that you have to force feed that stuff in there, but you don't become, okay, I want to be a sports writer, so now I'm not gonna be immersed in, you know, what movies are out or what music is out or where the world is going or whatever it is. You know, you never know what idea outside of sports is going to have some sort of application in sports. So just be open-minded to things like that.
Have you seen anything that has come out of the blue? Like, whoa, I can't believe that this person like did that. I would have never in a million years thought of either like some sort of article series or I don't know, just something out of the box, a podcast, something like that you would have never in a million years thought that's a great topic. Why had nobody tapped into that?
It's funny. There's an old expression that I think I was listening to an ESPN podcast. I don't even remember which one it was, maybe 10 years ago. One of the editors was doing a podcast, and the question in the interview was, what is your definition of a good idea? Mm-hmm. And the woman who was being interviewed, again, I wish I could remember what her name was. She said, I wish I'd thought of that. And you see that in fantasy. And sometimes these things are really simple. Like I think of what Ian Hartitz has done with his helicopter theme, where he just identifies a player he thinks he's going to splash in a week, and he puts out that cool little helicopter icon on his Twitter account, and he throws that out there, and look at the engagement he does. And I think of some of people like JJ Zacharyson, who saw the opportunity to take a strategy late round quarterback and actually make it his Twitter account, make it his brand. You know, I think of all the great work that Rich Rebar has done. And whenever you say Rich Rebar, you always think of the Konami code, which is being able to brand a theory, a strategy, and in a way that everybody can understand it. It's fun to say, it's pithy. Again, you know, what's my definition of a great idea? I wish I'd thought of it. Those are just some things that come to mind. I also, this is a little bit outside the fantasy space, but something else I'm very jealous of, and I wish I had thought of it, is I look at some people like Bill Simmons. I look at Joe Posnanski. These are two guys who are doing something that I wish I had thought of. A lot of what Bill Simmons does these days, and I'll admit, I'm just going to be transparent. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Simmons. There's some things about him I'm not crazy about, but I mean, look, the guy's a pioneer. The guy was an outsider in the sports writing industry, and he blazed the path and is being madly successful. And I think a lot of things that he does still works. And one of the projects he does that is the most popular things at the Ringer is they do a podcast called The Rewatchables, where they just talk about, for an hour and a half, they talk about a movie that came out 30 years ago. And I love doing that. I love talking about old stuff. And I look at Posnanski at The Athletic. He's bounced around a lot. Great, wonderful writer. He's doing a bunch of Hall of Fame baseball stuff where he's writing about players that retired 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. I just read a piece he wrote today on Bobby Grich, who was a baseball player in the 70s and 80s. And he's cultivated an environment where The Athletic is cool with him writing about a bunch of old stuff. And, you know, Simmons does a bunch. He loves to, you know, let's redraft the 2003 NBA draft. Let's talk about Chris Webber's legacy. You know, Chris Webber's been out of the league for, I don't know, 15 years now, whatever it is. And I wish I had seen up front early on. I wish I had thought of the rewatchables before the rewatchables came. I would love to be, and we've done some of that on some of my platforms on the breakfast table. We've gone back and discussed football and baseball movies. Yeah. So it's not like just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean you can't do some version of it. But I wish I'd understood maybe the way that you could do some historical takes and make a career or make a mark out of it, because that's something I love talking about. I spent so much time on Football Reference, and sometimes it's, there's a nuance in the 1987 season that's fascinating to me, and I might tweet about it. And I know it's not maybe the bread and butter of what I do, and I know a lot of people are following me. They don't want to hear how great Jerry Rice was in 1987 and how he should have won the MVP that year. But I always think about, what would I do if money was no object and I could do anything I want? I think I might just write a book about like all the MVP awards I don't agree with, and how Jerry Rice should have been the 1987 MVP, or how did Mark Mosley, a place kicker, win the 1982 MVP? So, hats off to Simmons and Posnanski for finding a way to take nostalgia and history and make it a big part of what they do on a regular basis.
Yeah, I get jealous of all those types of podcasts. Like when I started listening to All Fantasy Everything, I was like, we do fantasy drafts of random stuff all the time. Why did I, and like the Spitballers do something like that. So it's just like, we could have done that, and that would have been hilarious.
Right. Yeah, we do that on my fantasy baseball podcast. We do a draft.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have said, "Oh, well, you're copying Posnanski. His podcast does that." And to which I say, well, for one thing, if I'm doing something that Joe does, I'm not ashamed to say that. But
Yeah.
when I grew up, when I first got my driver's license, and my friends and I would go on trips, we'd drive to casinos, or we'd go out, we'd go somewhere that, go to visit a friend in college, 90 minutes away, 2 hours away. We were always making lists, and we were always drafting things. We just didn't know what to call it,
Yeah.
Back to my RotoWire days. When I was working at RotoWire in LA in the office, we used to do something called a death draft, where we would draft. Okay, we'd sit down and say, okay, let's draft the NL West baseball players for the next month. Let's play a fantasy league. Let's keep score of it, and when the month is over, let's just nuke it. It doesn't. We're just going to play for a month. Or we'd go to a game and we'd say, let's just draft players from this game. Which is DFS. We were basically playing DFS before it had a name. And I just wish I saw. My lousy business instincts. I wish I'd gone to Peter Schenke at RotoWire and been like, we could market this. We could make a game out of this. I think people would really like this.
Yeah.
And then we used to, some friends of mine, I think Mark Stopa, Kevin Payne, Aaron Skelly, we used to get together on Thanksgiving and drafted what was DFS before anybody called it DFS. We just do a Thanksgiving Day draft.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't think that this would have spill over that other people want to do this, and I could make it an idea. And look, there's probably somebody who was doing it before I was. I don't want to act like I was first, but it certainly hadn't been marketed and packaged to other people when we were doing it. So I don't know. We do silly drafts on my podcast. A lot of other people do it. I don't know who was first. I do know that, on the way to the Foxwoods Casino in 1993, we were probably drafting our favorite Aerosmith songs or something. And, I didn't realize that this could maybe be something I could do for a living, or something I could do on a mass platform. But I think list making probably goes back to the Bible.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I love making lists. Let's just not get started on that. I could go on and on for days about lists. So I want to know, before you were on Yahoo, had you done any any in front of the camera or behind the microphone types of things, or was this like a brand new thing for you to be thrown into?
For the most part, it's new. As a sports writer, I did occasional radio work, but not a lot of it. It was much, much different. The technology wasn't as good. I still think that, to be honest with you, I still think I'm learning with how to best present myself on video. I'm proud. We did win an award for the best fantasy baseball podcast in 2019. I'm proud of that. But I think it speaks to how good my guests were. How I could just ask a question and get out of the way. Also, the people who produced that podcast. Shout out to Brett Rader and Raghu and Sully, some of the other podcast producers we have at Yahoo. I mean, I'm podcasting. There's a guy doing his yard work next to me. They find a way to make that noise go away. They edit out some of the mistakes that we make. They make the thing sound good. And then they distribute it so people can get it. I still don't know. I mean, one advantage you're getting from doing it from the ground up is you're just going to learn so much more than I already know. I'm sure right now, if I was going to start my own podcast and had to produce the whole thing myself, I would be knocking on your door, and other people's doors who have produced their own podcasts, because I haven't had to do a lot of the things that a producer would do for me. I'm very thankful for that. But I don't by any means act like I'm like a trailblazer in this space. I'm still trying to get better at speaking, at cadence, at being concise. I think whenever, Chris Harris has me on his podcast, and I end up going twice as long as he planned on, because I still think, and I want to say this, by the way, again, not that some people don't write long and don't write really well when they write long, but learning how to be efficient with your words and with your thoughts and get the most bang for your buck. That's why I think Twitter really helps. I think it helped even more when the word character count was smaller. But being able to get in and get out and get the thrust you want without having to turn it into like a chat speak where you're using the you are as a word or something like that. But that's an important skill. You may have somebody's attention for a very short amount of time. Give them the important thing and speak efficiently. I can't even do it myself. But I'm still learning how to be better on video. Still learning how to podcast better. Still learning how to be a more efficient guest. How to punctuate my thoughts so it's clear that I'm done talking, so we don't talk all over each other. I think there's nothing worse than listening to a podcast where people are just babbling all over each other. Sometimes that's impatience, but a lot of times it's because the communication isn't as clear. So I consider that an ongoing effort to try to get better. And as anything, it's experience, it's trial and error, it's getting reps in, and it's also trying to check out what other people do. What do the fantasy football ballers do on their podcast that I like? What can I take from that? What can I learn from that?
That's exactly. And sometimes I feel like I might be talking over somebody or rambling on because I'm trying to get to the point that I just thought of while you were talking or whatever, that's a thing that happens too, is you're like, okay, and take notes and do this, but then it slips my mind. So yeah, the reps thing, it's been very beneficial to be able to sit down with people. And my first couple of podcast episodes, I had people on that I knew really well so that I could get more comfortable with it. What advice do you have for people who feel like they're not going to be that comfortable in front of the camera or behind the microphone, but they want to get their voice out there and they don't want to write, they want to do the stuff with the, behind the scenes stuff with the cameras and the microphones and all that jazz?
Yeah, again, it comes down to reps, just getting practice in. Try to treat the interactions as a conversation. Just pretend you're sitting next to the person, at a bar or on a park bench or, in somebody's living room. And another important thing to do with this whole thing is that it's always important to be prepared, but don't be so married to your prep notes that you're trying to force in everything that you wrote down, or you're trying to ask every question that you had. Try to make it as organic and as natural and as meandering as it's going to be, and don't force it. The best sports announcer, Sean McDonough will tell you, or Jim Nantz would tell you, or Joe Buck would tell you, you're going to do a ton of prep work for your game. And most of that will never see the light of day. And if you try to force in every note that you had on Alex Smith or on Logan Thomas or on Jalen Hurts in that Sunday night game, it's just going to get in the way of the broadcast, and it's going to be a disservice to your listener. So be as prepared as you can, but then just kind of let things go where they go. And a lot of times the best conversations you'll have will be totally organic things, paths you didn't see, and be okay with that.
How is it working with a group of people on a podcast, having, it's you and another person as well, versus what you think? I don't know if you've ever solo podcast or not, but how the differences are, and, which one would you prefer if you had, to choose one or the other?
For me, I think it works best as a one-on-one medium. So two people.
Yep.
I think it can be difficult to have multiple people. If you're going to have multiple people, you really need a few things. You need to, if you can be in the same room, that's great. Obviously, in today's day and age, that's something that a lot of us can't do.
Right.
Maybe we'll get back to that someday. But if you're going to have more than two, you need to have some understanding of, maybe being able to see each other on video, having signals where somebody wants to talk. Stuff like that. I think you need to really punctuate well, so it's clear that you're done speaking. Scripting pre-hand can help, although you don't want to be married to the script so much that it becomes stale and canned. There are people who do podcasts on their own or speak on their own who do really well, and I haven't had a lot of experience with it. I'm afraid that if I did need to do it, I might be pretty lousy at it.
Yeah.
But don't let that discourage you, by the way. I can't say enough. If I go back to my early writing, my early podcasting, my early anything, I'm sure the stuff is mediocre. And it's just, of course, some people may be naturally talented, and, maybe the first time, Bono, sang a song, he sounded great. I don't know. But although, U2 was rejected by a million record companies, don't let that discourage you either. There's, back to my friend Koppelman, he was told the Rounder script was passed by a million different studios. You can't let that, all you need is one person to see value in what you do. And sometimes that person can just be you. But I think I need somebody to bounce off of. I think a podcast format works best with two. But again, there are many successful ones like the Footballers where it's more than two people. That just means you got to have some rules of the road, and you got to have some traffic cop understanding when you go into your broadcast.
And you guys have all different kinds of personalities. So what do you think the advantage of having multiple personalities and not having somebody that's the exact same cookie cutter as the next guy?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's different perspectives, different takes, it's good. I think it's good when podcasts have disagreement, as long as they're not the manufactured faux disagreement. I don't really have much of a stomach for that. We see a lot of that on TV now. Let's just make up an argument, or just say something outrageous like, "Oh, LeBron James isn't one of the top 20 players in the NBA anymore." Hot take. Let's get some clicks on this. But it's good to have. You want different personalities. I think in anything in life, you learn the most when you find somebody you respect who disagrees with you. And that's why, like, if I find myself in disagreement with Evan Silva, if I find myself in disagreement with Andy Behrens, if I find myself in disagreement with Pat Fitzmaurice, even though I agree with those guys an awful lot, when we disagree, it gives me a great chance to say, what am I missing here? What has Evan seen that I haven't seen? and maybe if I can't figure it out, I'll send them a text, or I'll send them a message or something like that. But I think we learn the most from people we respect who we disagree with, and I think those make for the best podcasts as well.
And how important do you think entertainment value is to a podcast? I know you don't want to be too boring with it. You don't want to be over. I guess it depends on who you are, but how important is entertainment value to a podcast or a TV or a YouTube channel or whatever?
I think it's definitely important. It's just a matter of knowing what you're good at and knowing what your audience is like.
Mm-hmm.
There may be some podcasts that are probably higher on entertainment than they are on information. There's certainly some podcasts that are higher on information than they may be on bells and whistles and entertainment. And people want different things. Some people may just want the facts. They just want the numbers. They just want something they can apply, and they don't care, for a lot of personality added to it. And other people would be like, no, the personality stuff is what drives me. Again, I come back to my former colleague, Brad Evans, who has gone off on his own. And by the way, one thing I love about our industry is look at how many people are doing their own thing now who were part of. Look, I'm at Yahoo. I'm thrilled to be at Yahoo. I hope I'm at Yahoo for the next 30 years. That would be great. But I think it's awesome that Levitan and Silva did their own thing at FTN. At ETR. I think it's great that Brad Evans did his own thing at FTN. As much as we loved him at Yahoo, and Brad had a very successful run at Yahoo, I think it's great to see people take ownership of their own thing and have the upside belong to them if they make it pop. I think it's somebody like Brad, he's always going to be more, I think, sliding towards the entertainment side of things than maybe I will be. I'm trying more to inform somebody. Not that Brad doesn't have, stats and information as thing, but he's selling a personality that maybe isn't my style. I think there's room for different things. It's just, you have to decide, what am I good at? Some people are maybe naturally more organically funny than others. Some people may be better at presenting stats. Some people may be just more into the recommendations, the hardcore, this is what you want. You're trying to get a list of recommendations from me. Let me give that out to you. I think there's room for all different styles. That's something that you really have to answer for yourself.
And how has COVID affected the podcast with Yahoo? Has it gone off without a hitch? Were there issues? I don't know how it is usually versus how it is now. So
yeah, most of our stuff was already remotely taped, so it hasn't changed that much. There are some things that Yahoo would have done. Some of our broadcast work, which is a lot of stuff that I'm not super involved with. A lot of that stuff would have been done in person, would have been done in a studio that isn't now. That people are, we're at a time now where people tape in their living rooms, people tape in their kitchens, any place. How many times do we see there'll be fantasy news that will break and somebody will post a video on Twitter and it's from their car? They're sitting there at a red light or in a parking lot and they're saying, okay, you have to pick up Alexander Madison this week or something like that. So that's the great thing I think about, as much as COVID's been awful and sad and frustrating and scary, and we're still in all those spaces.
Right.
The cool thing is now more than ever, people have accepted that any recording or broadcast studio can be just anywhere you have a internet connection.
Excellent. Is there anything that you think somebody in particular would need if they were doing podcasting or YouTube? The basic essentials that you need if you're going to turn your office or your closet or whatever into your studio?
I mean, there's going to be levels of it based on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to be. I can already see you have a much better microphone than I do, and I'm jealous of that. Although they've given us nice equipment at Yahoo. I don't want to get in trouble with those guys, because they really do support us. And anytime I say I need something, it comes overnight the next day. So they're awesome. But you certainly, the two things you can't get around is you need a reliable computer and you need the best internet connection you can. If you can get a plugged connection, much better. Because you can't be on wireless that doesn't work. I have a plugged connection in my house. It's fairly reliable. There are occasional gaps. We tape on Zoom recorders, not to be confused with a Zoom video conference, but we actually record the audio independently of the other guest, and then the producers sync it all together. That's really good if you can do it. But the most thing is, you're going to have to spend money on a computer that you can rely on, and you're going to have an internet connection that is reliable as well.
Yes, I figured I had to go buy a new laptop whenever I started this up, because the old one wasn't cutting it. And then, you're the first guest I have tonight that I'm actually plugged in. So I've had a couple hiccups, especially when I was talking to Matt Harmon. It was just like, I don't know. So I bit the bullet and was like, just do it. It's go on Amazon, buy, it's not that hard. So I want to know about about your other podcast venture, The Breakfast Table. What exactly is that all about? And just kind of describe it for everybody listening.
Yeah, that's something I've been doing with Michael Salfino for several years. We started writing. I guess he started doing an occasional article for RotoWire when I was already at RotoWire, and I would go into the comments. By the way, a lot of people have started their fantasy careers by being commenters or readers or whatever it is. I think that's how Mike got the idea of writing for RotoWire. He saw some articles. He thought, oh, I could do something you guys aren't doing. Mm-hmm. They had him start writing articles, and I found a lot of things we would disagree on. I would get in the comments, and we'd have these long exchanges in the comments. And finally, one of the guys at RotoWire, was probably Jeff Erickson or Chris Liss, said, this is an article. You guys should write this up and print it. And the thing that Mike and I have, and I'll admit that at times it's a little bit frustrating for both of us, but we just have different approaches. We have different styles, and we seem to naturally, we do agree on a lot of stuff. Mike would say that too, but we naturally seem to have different opinions on things. And he's more of a stat-based guy. And although he relies on observation too, and we know in sports, it can't be all stats. It can't be all scouting. It has to be a merge of the two things. But he's probably more model-based than I am. I'm probably a little bit more observational, or maybe, if you will, I know it's a dirty word, but I might be a little bit more narrative-based than he is.
Yeah.
And so we have personalities where, although there's a lot, our relationship is built out of mutual respect. And I've learned a ton from Mike, and anything I've accomplished in this industry, a lot of it has to do with my friendship with Mike and some of the great conversations we've had. A million of them not recorded, and some of them recorded. But I think what works for our podcast is there's just a natural difference of styles. We don't lack in strength of conviction and strength of personality. We're not afraid to get a little bit argumentative at times. None of it is ever for show. We never say, we don't sit down and say, what do we disagree on? Let's scrap over that. This stuff just happens organically. And, sometimes he gets frustrated with me. Sometimes I get frustrated with him. And I'll admit, I'm not going to lie about this. Sometimes we'll record a podcast and we'll finish it, and I'll think to myself, I don't know if anybody would enjoy listening to that. And then a day later, somebody will say, oh, your podcast was great this week. I'm like, well, okay, there goes my argument. Not that everything's not going to land for people, and our style won't be for everybody. But I think we just have because we have a divergence of styles, and because we just naturally seem to fall into debate, and a lot of times it's passionate, and a lot of times we really are dug in on things. We just have a chemistry that I don't think you can really fake. It's just a natural chemistry that I think we had at the moment we first met and started talking about stuff. And Mike had the great idea to make it a podcast a long time ago. And I'm proud of the work that we've done on that.
Yeah, you guys do an excellent job with that. And it's really good to listen and hear you guys have that chemistry. And it's missing from some podcasts. And when you hear it, and it kind of sucks you in, and you want that to be something that you continue to listen to. And I know that it's connected to Patreon. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And you have a couple of episodes up there just for people to check it out, right?
Yeah. Some of the episodes, Mike does all the producing on it. And he does put out free episodes, and sometimes they're off season things. Sometimes we'll do something that isn't strictly fantasy and just throw a bonus episode. That's the oldest business model in the world, right? Give people a taste for free and see if they're interested in it. So that's been something that we've done, and also, don't get discouraged as you're podcasting. If you're looking for people to be guests of yours, to be partners of yours and everything, listen to different people, have different guests on of different styles, new school, old school. You talked about Matt Harmon. There's another, a winning example of a guy who said, hey, there's a type of analysis I want to do with wide receivers. I don't think anybody's doing it. I think if I put this out there, it's something I can market. It's something I can, kind of put myself on the map with it. I think the world of Matt, he's somebody who's good at everything. He's really good at video. He's really good at having an idea or a good take on something when it's really fresh, which is a skill that you need in our industry. But a lot of this is going to be trial and error. A lot of it, if you're trying to make it in this industry, for whatever that means to you, maybe you're always going to have a full-time job. You want to dabble in it. Or maybe you're hoping that it can be a bigger part of your life, or maybe even what you do. Maybe you want to own your own company someday, whatever it is. A lot of it's just going to be like anything else, trial and error, see what works, see what doesn't work. I mean, I think about when I go to the golf driving range and I'm trying different grips, I'm trying different swing paths, I'm trying different things. I read in a magazine, a lot of that stuff fails. A lot of that stuff dies on the cutting room floor. But you never know. You don't need to be right. You don't need not that many things to click to be successful. So just be open-minded that, not everything's going to work. It's all about experimentation, trying different things. And trying to get a sense of throw stuff out there and get an idea of maybe what landed, what didn't.
So since it's called the breakfast table, I'll ask you a corny question. What's your favorite breakfast?
I'm boring. Bacon, eggs. I'm happy. Maybe French toast, although I think there's a lot of variance with French toast. When French toast, if I go to a restaurant or make it myself and it's bad, I don't want to throw it out. When it's good, it's like, wow, why don't I eat this 5 days a week? Mm-hmm. I'm pretty boring. I'm a bacon and eggs guy. Scrambled eggs, bacon.
That's me. I get made fun of all the time when I order my breakfast because everybody's getting all these fancy things with this, that, and the other. I'm like, nah, just bacon, scrambled eggs. That's all you need. So I want to ask you a few questions just about playing fantasy football and baseball. Sure. Obviously, I don't know as much about baseball. I have played fantasy baseball before, but I couldn't handle it once football season started up. It was just too hard of an overlap for me. But what is one of the biggest things that you think people either don't pay attention to, they overlook, or they just kind of ignore when they're playing fantasy football?
One thing that I think is important is, this may be a case of being too smart sometimes. I think it's more important to play fantasy football. There's going to be exceptions to every rule. So the first rule is that there are no unbreakable rules. Mm-hmm. But I think fantasy football is best played with a microscope, not a telescope, which is, how can I make the best decisions this week? And maybe what would be my spillover to what my plan is next week? I'm not somebody who in August will say, oh, I'm going to draft this player because look at his week 14, week 15 matchups. They're unbelievably great. And I'm going to smash in those weeks. I just don't think, I think too much can go wrong. There's too much noise in the league. There's too many injuries. Teams that we think we're going to be good end up being bad. Teams that we think we're going to be bad end up being good. That I think it's incumbent to focus on what's in front of you and what's in the near future, and not get bogged down in what's 2 or 3 months away. And I know there's probably somebody out here saying, well, wait a minute. I foresaw ahead of time that the Lions were going to stink all year, and I was going to gang up on the Lions at the end of the season. And I mean, sometimes you can be right on that stuff. I think we know more today in what's in front of us. I think we underestimate how clear those pictures can be sometimes. And I think we overestimate our ability to know the future and to know what's 3 or 4 months down the road. So I would be, again, play fantasy with a microscope, not a telescope. That would be my advice.
And is there a specific position in baseball, football, or even both that you think is not easier to hit on, but more likely that you'll hit on somebody?
That's a great question. Pitchers are kind of like the running backs of Sammy Reed made this point a few years ago on a Twitter thread that was so great. I thought Andy Barron should have created an FSWA award for it and given it to Sammy. And when we won that podcast award last year, Sammy was the guest on the episode we submitted.
Cool.
And so I always joke to Sammy that, half of this belongs to you. Maybe more than half, because, it's because you were so good on that podcast that the judges thought the show was maybe better than it is. So I always have much love to Sammy Reed. But he compared, I love this comparison. He says that the running backs of fantasy football are the pitchers of fantasy baseball. And there's a lot of attrition there. There's a lot of injury risk there. But if you have the right pitchers in a fantasy baseball season, your odds of winning go up much more than if you may have hit on the right shortstop or the right outfielder or whatever it is. And as much as running backs can drive us crazy, and as much as anybody right now who drafted Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, they're like, my season stunk. I needed those guys and they got hurt. And that's just part of the game. But I like to link those things together. If you can solve the pitching, and if you can solve the running backs, I think that's really important. And by the way, if you're going to say to yourself, well, how do I solve the pitching? One of the great fantasy websites and fantasy resources and fantasy baseball right now is this site called Pitcher List. Nick Pollock is the guy out in front of that. I can't say enough how great the work is that they're doing. Also, the guys at Fangraphs are terrific. Shout out to that website. Paul Spohr is a good friend of mine. He's doing great work there. Jason Collette, his work at Fangraphs and Roto Wire is outstanding. But if you're asking yourself right now, how am I going to win my fantasy baseball league? I think you have to try to figure out the pitching is difficult and as maddening as it can be, because as Sandy said, they're running backs of fantasy baseball.
Do your friends come to you for fantasy football advice or fantasy baseball advice? And how does that go?
Oh, they definitely do. And one of the funniest things, anybody in our industry, I think, knows this.
Mm-hmm.
December rolls around, the fantasy playoffs roll around, and people you haven't heard from for months. I have a guy who I was friends with who was my mailman who moved out of town. We'd grown up in the same area. I didn't know him. I met him in Michigan. We were friends. He would talk to my dog. He'd hang out. Good guy. Moves out of town. I don't hear from him for 10 or 11 months. And then, hey, dude, what's going on? Hey, everything going good? Hey, I'm in the fantasy semifinals. I don't know who to play. And there was a friend of mine, more my little brother's friend than my friend. We had a week-long powwow about Russell Wilson versus Jalen Hurts. The week before, it was obvious that you had to play Hurts. It was that 1 week where it's still Wilson would have been ranked higher than Hurts on almost everybody's board. And we both had that choice to make. Now, on my particular team, I needed upside. My opponent had already had a big Thursday game. I was an underdog. I thought Hurts had more upside, so I went with Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to play Hurts too, but I think he just needed somebody to nudge him to Hurts. And I told him I really wasn't sure what I would do, and I didn't want to talk him out of what his process was. And he ended up playing Wilson. He would have won his game with Hurts. I feel terrible about that, but yeah, my friends do come to me with fantasy questions and advice. A lot of times we're just asking each other, what do you like this week? What props do you like? What teams do you like? What over-unders do you like? But it's always funny when people I may have not heard from for several months. There's something about, this is a nuance to fantasy football, right? You have somebody who's like my friend Todd, who was the Hurts Wilson guy.
Mm-hmm.
He had the most points in his league. He had the best fantasy team in his league. He did great. He made good fantasy decisions for 3.5 months. And then he second-guessed himself in the playoffs. And I was trying to say to him, look, you're in this position because you're a good player, because you make good decisions. There's nothing wrong with just sticking to whatever process that is, because I believe that's a good process.
Is there any wrinkle or rule or anything that has been popularized in fantasy football, baseball, that you're not really a fan of, but it's something that like everybody enjoys?
One thing, there's going to be different opinions on this, but when I hear always start your studs, I kind of recoil a little bit to that. Well, first of all, if somebody is such an overwhelming stud, you don't need help. I mean, nobody needed to be handheld with Derrick Henry in the fantasy playoffs. You started him. I know he wasn't great in week 15, but I think it was. But yeah, we all know Derrick Henry's great. Mm-hmm. But Russell Wilson's a great example, right? Russell Wilson was probably the MVP front runner 2 months into the season. But then once things started to go bad there, I think you have to be open-minded to maybe it's okay to play somebody else. And I'm not afraid to play a player who has a shorter track record or a shorter resume, or maybe it was an undrafted player or something like that. I'm not afraid to use those guys if I think they're the right play, and over somebody who, I remember a long time ago when Marshall Faulk was having a down season, there was a question on the Sirius channel about, do I play Marshall Faulk in the fantasy playoffs? And the answer was, well, wasn't he your first round pick? I don't care about that. I care about who I think is going to score the most points. And if that's the undrafted free agent who's now starting for a team based on injury versus the guy who, was the 5th pick in the draft. Leonard Fournette was the 4th pick in the draft. Doesn't mean he's a good football player. Right. It just means we thought he was a good football player 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm not afraid to bench a quote unquote name player for somebody with far less resume, far less draft capital, a worse time in the 40 at the combine or the 3-cone drill. I don't care about that. I just I'm not afraid to do something unorthodox. And I realize when it goes wrong, you end up second guessing yourself like crazy, but I don't care. I make the best decision I can. Yeah. And if it meant playing somebody who was unheralded or didn't have the draft capital or the reputation, I can live with that.
Yeah, I think I was the same way with Zeke this year, where it was like, I don't know if I can start my stud, because And
it's a great example. Well, at one point, he's not a stud. I mean, he's a stud in the early season, but how many games does he need to play poorly? Now, I want to own this. I was banging the drum a lot too. Maybe Pollard's not that much different than Zeke, and then Zeke came back a couple of weeks ago and actually looked great again. I think it may have helped him to see Pollard play so well, just to maybe light a little bit of a fire under him. But that's a great example. The point being that whatever you thought of Ezekiel Elliott in August and September that should not necessarily be your opinion of Ezekiel Elliott in December. That's a very important thing to grasp in this game.
And here's a fun one for you. First of all, did you think the NFL season was going to happen? Or was there ever a point in time where you were like, no, there's no way this is happening?
I felt confident they would start it. And I felt very anxious and nervous that they could complete it in a way that wouldn't have just a ton of messiness to it. No, look, the season has been messy on some level. Yeah. There's been rescheduling. There's been teams, the Broncos 1 week basically had to forfeit with no quarterbacks. I mean, that wasn't even a competitive football game. No. What the Browns had to deal with the Jets a few weeks ago, where last minute all of their receivers were unavailable. I'm glad the Browns still made the playoffs, because it would have kind of stunk if they didn't make it because of that game. But they plowed through. I'm not privy to all the inside information of how they plowed through. They did get through. They played the season on time. Should they have? That's an open question. I was nervous I knew they'd start a season. There's a ton of money at stake.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if they could get through it. I wasn't sure if they could complete a season that would feel satisfactory, that would feel legitimate. And to be fair, as much anxiousness has gone into it, I think they played a season that we can all feel pretty good about.
And how did you feel about how the baseball season went? Because I know that's your other sport that you keep your eye on.
Yeah, that was a lot far different. That was a lot more stressful, because they didn't have, when the whole COVID thing broke, right? Mm-hmm. The NBA shuts down. Yeah. The NHL shuts down. Obviously, all the college sports were canceled. No tournament, all that stuff. But when they finally wanted to reboot NHL and NBA, it was easy to go to a playoffs because they had already played most of the season. The players had already made most of their money. And so it wasn't that hard. So they could say, okay, let's set up bubbles for playoffs. Let's try to run a playoffs that's legitimate, that has some credibility to it. And they were able to pull that off, and credit, the NBA. I mean, no league has a better understanding of where things are socially. Mm-hmm. And the partnership between player and ownership. The NBA is so much far ahead of that than all the other major sports. And I salute, the job that they've done with that, where they give the players agency. And I feel like the NBA cares about their players. And sometimes you have to wonder if the other sports have that same level of caring and commitment, social commitment. But with baseball, the owners were trying to figure out a way to get to an expanded playoffs, because that's where the money is for them. Now that the gate was taken off the board, they weren't going to have fans, or they're very limited fans. Whatever they make from ticket sales, concessions, parking, that was all at the window this year, and they weren't going to play a big season. So the ownership wanted a short season. Let's make an expanded playoffs. We'll make some money back there. The players aren't going to make a lot of money that way. They're going to have a big give back. So there was a very acrimonious standoff between management and players. And, the common person to a large degree doesn't want to hear that. They don't want to hear millionaires and billionaires struggling and complaining and all that. I know that can be a little bit reductive to say that. It's more complicated than that. But I wasn't sure that they would necessarily have a baseball season. I wasn't sure it would be legitimate. As soon as they started, wow, okay, the Marlins have a COVID problem. Oh, wow, the Cardinals have a COVID problem. Mm-hmm. And unlike football, we saw games canceled. We saw teams not playing for weeks at a time. And so I wasn't sure. A lot of people smarter than me were like, this isn't working. We should pull the plug. They tried it. It's not working out. And I think they eventually got to a place where they played a season that had some merit to it. It was 60 games, or about 60 games for most teams. Mm-hmm. Not a perfect season. It's really hard, by the way, to do analysis for the next season coming up, because it's like, what if we just saw an NFL season that was 6 games? What would you do with it? What could you really make of it? That's basically what baseball had. But I thought they did the best they could. I thought the playoffs were largely satisfying. I know there's a very unusual moment at the end where the Dodgers win it. They find out Justin Turner has COVID. Why is he on the field? Why is he celebrating with everybody? That was kind of an awkward moment for baseball. But I thought they did the best they could. They didn't have the advantage that the NBA had played most of their season, the NHL had played most of their season, and the NFL got the most time to crib off everybody else, to learn. Granted, the NFL has all sorts of challenges with more teams, more players, a lot of body types that may be in big trouble if they got COVID. I think a lot of people were petrified of that. What if a bunch of offensive linemen get COVID with some of the health issues that they face with the body types that they have? That could be a major problem. But I think baseball did the best they could. I know a lot of people don't have great faith in the commissioner and the leadership of the game, but I thought for the most part, I would have given baseball like maybe a B to a B plus, how they ultimately pulled off a very difficult situation.
Well, let's talk about something more fun.
Okay,
let's
sure.
get away from the seriousness of it all. It's just, I know you're a big music fan.
Sure.
Are you a big live music fan as well?
I am. I know we talked about this a little bit privately. You had recently tweeted about how much you miss live music.
Yes.
And it's, me being a little bit older, I feel like my days as a passionate, eager, who is playing tonight? How can I get to that show? That was me in my 20s and 30s. As I've gotten a little bit older, I don't go out as much. But what I really miss is I have friends who are in bands. Like I shout out to Steve Gleason, one of my very best friends, who's in a Black Crowes cover band, and he's in an 80s rock band.
Mm-hmm.
And he plays out. And by the way, Steve is, I know the people listening probably don't know him, but he's somebody who grew up his whole life being a music fan, but didn't play any instruments. And he just decided, in his like mid to late 30s, you know what? I want to learn how to play guitar. I want to learn how to play. I'm going to buy a bass. I'm going to take lessons. I just want to be good enough to jam with my friends, maybe be in a garage band. And now he's in like a really, really good Black Crowes cover band. And to illustrate how good they are, he played at Daryl's house. They had a gig canceled at Jones Beach. I mean, he plays legitimate gigs now. He's a legitimate rock and roll guy in addition to being a school teacher. And there's just there's no timetable. What Morgan Freeman's acting career, what it all happened after he turned 45 or 50 or something like that. I mean, there's no timetable for this stuff. You can always decide, I want to get into this. So if anybody out here is listening and you think, oh, I missed my window, fantasy's a young person's game, it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of how much you care about it. But when it comes to live music, I think about, I miss seeing my friend Steve, and the people. I miss seeing the Black Crowes cover band, the Americans is the name of the band. I miss seeing those guys play. I miss hanging out. My fantasy baseball draft with the guys I grew up with, the guys, we call it the Chelmsford League in Massachusetts, even though none of us are from Chelmsford anymore. Last year we had a concert the night of the draft. My friend Steve's band played. So we all went to that. We all hung out until like 2 a.m. It was like the best day of the year. So I miss, rocking out with my friends.
Yeah, I get that. My birthday was in February, so we were able to go see my friend's band because it was early part of February. So we weren't under any restrictions yet. And that was like a couple weeks later. Nope. And it hurts. But
it really hurts. I'll tell you another thing I miss. I miss playing poker so badly.
Yeah.
I'm in a weekly poker game with some people in Michigan, and I'll go to the local casino sometimes and play. And that's something I love, playing poker. I think if you're I talked about TJ earlier. If you're a good poker player, I think it has fantasy implications. I think if you're a good fantasy player, you'd probably be a good poker player if you put some time into it. And I miss playing poker so much.
So what else do you do in your free time besides playing poker? You were talking about golf earlier. Is that something that you're really into doing on your free time?
Yeah, golf was a big salvation for me in 2020, going to the driving range. Shout out to the Royal Oak driving range in Michigan, where my main track. It's just fun to tinker. It's fun to experiment. It's fun to watch YouTube videos and try to improve. I used to be, I'd say, a pretty good golfer in my 20s, but I took it way too seriously. I'd get mad too easily. And then I just got to the point in life where you just get comfortable in your own skin. And I'm not saying I can't get frustrated now and then, but I mean, I take it so less seriously as far as you get. I've accepted I'm not good enough to get mad about it. I'm just out to have a good time with my friends. And I hit enough good shots. I mean, on a good day, I might sneak into the 80s if the course is easy enough. On a course that's maybe harder, I'll probably be in the 90s. So, I'm good enough to play with. And anybody, I don't know if you played any golf. If you hit one shot the way you want to, and the ball takes off and you see that trajectory, or you nail a long putt or something, it's just an intoxicating feeling. I'm always, back to the math background, I've always been interested in angles and, in physics and why does this swing work and this swing doesn't work? I think I understand a lot more about the golf swing than maybe I did a couple of years ago. Because again, it's been kind of my spirit animal this year. When I've been having trouble sleeping, I just put on a couple of YouTube golf videos and try to learn things about, oh, this is a better method for playing out of the bunker. This is a better method for lag putting. This is a better method for hitting a hybrid out of the rough or something like that. I'm a sucker for improvement. I'm a sucker for being able to mark my progress. I like trying things. I like experimenting. And yeah, if you told me a few years ago I'd like going to the driving range and hitting 100 golf balls, maybe more than that, I would have been like, that sounds like drudgery to me. But I just like anything else to be successful at something, of whatever success I have in golf. It's probably very mild. You have to fall in love with the process. And I think I fell in love with the process of golf this year.
Yeah, I think my dad, he is a big golfer. I don't golf, but I've hear him talk about it all the time. And he was so upset when they closed the golf courses for a little bit. And then when they reopened, he was like the first one that was there because it's like a nice therapy session, kind of just, So I get where you're coming from. I'm like that with certain things too, where it's just like, especially during this pandemic, to fall in love with something, like really fall in love with something. Do you have any other hobbies or things that you're really interested in that people might not even know that it's something that you like?
Yeah, nothing that wouldn't be off the beaten path. I love to read. Yeah. I love anything about history. I love documentaries. I love reading biographies, stuff like that. I'm a history buff. I spend a lot of time on the sports reference sites. I spend a lot of time in the Sports Illustrated vault. I love to read. Another thing I like to do is I like to listen to old podcasts. I like to listen to. I feel like if a podcast is done the right way, it can. Now, granted, if you're previewing Week 15 of the NFL season, that is a shelf life. Nobody's going to want to listen. In 5 years, but like I like to listen. I like to reread. I keep a lot of old. I've been able to throw out some of my old reference materials, but I used to have all these old preview magazines and books for different seasons, and I'd like to say, oh, what did people think 5 or 10 years ago? Let's look at. Like the Fantasy Index, I think, is a great football magazine. Shout out to Ian Allen, who's one of the pioneers in our industry of fantasy, Hall of Famer. One day, just for fun, I'll look at, what did he think of this year's particular draft in 2005? What did they think the year Randy Moss came out, or what did they think the year Adrian Peterson came out, or what did they think in 2014 when all those rookie receivers went crazy? Did they expect that this class was going to be as generational as it was? Or I might look back and look at the great rookie class we just saw for receivers. How did Jalen Reagor get picked before Justin Jefferson? How did that happen? So I'm kind of meandering away from your question, but I love history. I love looking back on what the perception is, because it's easy for somebody to say, like somebody could easily say, oh, Reagor was a stupid pick. Why didn't they take Jefferson? Look how great he is. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. Let's go back to what was the prevailing thought before the draft. Let's look at a bunch of mock drafts and see what was the pro and con on Jefferson, because it seems crazy now how late he went, right?
Yeah.
Or how did Henry Ruggs go at the front of this receiver? Not that he couldn't be great. I mean, and who knows? Maybe Reagor will end up being a great player too. I don't want to act like these guys' careers are over or anything, because players get better. I mean, I was taking the task today for something I said about Josh Allen a year ago, where I wasn't sure that Josh Allen would ever be a great player. Guess what? Josh Allen's a great football player.
Yeah.
I got that one wrong. He improved. He got a lot better. These players are not static.
Right.
It did help that they brought in Stephon Diggs. It did help that they added other pieces. Davis has been in a complimentary role, has been really good. Cole Beasley has become a great player. Brian Daboll's had a really nice season with the play sheet. But I love history. I love reading. I did a lot of that's other than golf. Reading is probably the thing. I guess the three things that saved me this year in a really difficult year for a lot of people. The three things that probably saved me were golf, were reading, and were music. And music is just the soul. I spend every day listening to music, and a lot of times I write with music in my ears and stuff. And so you give me something good to read, you give me a bucket of balls, and you give me a music player and some good music. Maybe something good to eat too, and that's a good day.
Yeah, that sounds like the perfect day. I would take that in a heartbeat. So you were talking about reading. Is there a book that you've read recently that you would suggest other people go and read as well?
Yeah, one thing I recently reread, if you've ever seen the 30 for 30 on Chris Herron, I think it was called Unguarded. He was a high school basketball phenom in Massachusetts in the mid-90s, went to college, had a bunch of drug problems, lost his way a little bit, went to the NBA, developed an opioid addiction, and his life bottomed out. And at one point I think he had a heroin overdose, and he was pronounced dead for like 30 seconds or a minute or something like that. Chris Herron has since cleaned up his life, become a speaker, a motivational speaker, become a empowerment speaker for kids. He's really doing great things. He's just trying to let people learn from the mistakes he made. And he really believes in building esteem, building a sense of self, building a sense of understanding of people around you and stuff like that. I can't say enough how much I respect what Chris Herron has done with his life. And one of the things I've read his autobiography a few times, which is called Basketball Junkie. But I've also read a book that he wrote with Bill. I guess Bill Reynolds wrote it, but Herron was the star of it. It's called Fall River Dreams, which follows Chris Herron's junior year in high school. It's kind of like a Friday Night Lights for basketball. It also talks about the legacy of Fall River, Massachusetts, which people who don't know Fall River, probably the only thing they know about Fall River, the thing that put Fall River on the map is the Lizzie Borden story, 200 years ago, whatever, with the 40 wax and all that. So this is a small town that lacks identity, and their basketball team is really good in their local high school, and to the point that maybe it's a little bit more important than it should be. The players who play for that team feel a ton of pressure. Herron became a really fascinating guy. I think he was the Massachusetts Player of the Year 2 years in a row, and was in the McDonald's All-American game and all that stuff. So it's just the early origins of Herron and how he was struggling with his early fame and the expectations. His older brother was a great high school star. His father was a local politician, and he wasn't really sure, even though outwardly he had a lot of cockiness and braggadocio, he wasn't really sure who he wanted to be. And he didn't really enjoy playing basketball at the time. Now knowing the full story, knowing that he would bottom out in college a little bit, he would certainly bottom out as a professional player. He went all over the world playing basketball. He had all sorts of drug problems. So make sure you see the 30 for 30 Unguarded, which is terrific. It's a Jonathan Hawk documentary. He's one of the best documentarians we have today. Anything that Jonathan Hawk does, you should watch. But just a shout out to Chris Herron for what he's done with his life. Anybody who, for a living, does something that helps people, that empowers people, that gives people a chance in life. That's why I have so much respect for people who teach. Yeah. So much respect for people who share, people who've struggled in their lives, who've overcome them and want to help other people do the positive things that they've done. I have so much respect for that. But the Herron book, Fall River Dreams, is excellent. I would check that out. Also, if you want, when the baseball season rolls around, maybe this isn't the right time to read it, but when we get into spring training and you have a little spring fever, I like to read Ball 4 over and over again, which is Jim Bouton's book. He was a knuckleball pitcher in the late 60s. Recently, I think he died in the last year or two. He was kind of a hero of mine. And it's a story of a player who's a total outsider on his team. He's throwing a different pitch. He was kind of seen as a cerebral weirdo. He didn't really fit in with some of the jock culture at the time. He was questioning a lot of the ownership practices. Free agency really hadn't become a thing yet. The players were bound by the reserve clause, and they were fighting for every little penny they could get. And it's just it's a story on group dynamics. I've always said that Ball 4 could be taught in a psychology class. Somebody once said about Ball 4 that it wasn't a baseball book. It was a book about people that happened to play baseball. I think you could enjoy Ball 4 even if you're not a baseball fan, just as what is it like to be an outsider in a testosterone environment where you're maybe a little bit more thoughtful than that. Jim Bouton was always a hero of mine. I think Ball 4 is a very funny book, but even more so, a very perceptive book, and a book I try to read every couple of years.
Oh, goodness. I'm gonna have to add these to my list because I want to read more. I've got a stack next to my bed, but I haven't touched them yet.
What have you read? Do you have a book reco from this year?
I liked The Silent Patient is what I read recently. That was a really good book. I read so many books that I really enjoyed, but that's the first one that I can think of that really was like, whoa, when I read it.
Oh, I want to say also, I'm mentioning a lot of nonfiction. I probably side towards nonfiction these days. I've read a lot of golf books. The John Feinstein golf books are really great. Slaying the Tiger by Shane Ryan is maybe the best book about PGA Tour that I've ever read. But if you want a fiction recommendation, I think you can't go wrong with anything by Murakami. So I would maybe look, if you're not familiar with him, he's a wonderful writer. I also went back and reread Bright Lights, Big City, which I think is a rare case where the book and the movie are both really good. Jay McInerney's first book, which is probably largely autobiographical. McInerney won't really come clean on how much of that book is his own life, but it was a book about being young, being in Manhattan in the 80s. There's a lot of drugs in the book, but not. It doesn't glorify it. I mean, the guy's life is pretty much spiraling out of control. But it's a very quick read too. If you once we start flying again, if you have a 2-hour, 3-hour flight, you may be able to knock off, depending on how quickly you read. Bright Lights, Big City could be a 1-day book for you. So that's another. If you want some fiction, McInerney's a writer I like, and Murakami, you can't go wrong with him.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got a wide variety down there. We give each other books for anniversaries, birthdays, and stuff, and then I read a little bit and figure out if I like the book or not. I've got the No Effects autobiography that they wrote. I'm reading that right now. It's a little crazy.
You say give each other books. That's one thing I love to do with my friends. Yeah. We're always like buying books for each other.
Yeah.
I don't have enough place to put all my books. I probably need a few books. I wish somebody would give me a bookshelf instead of a book, but sometimes. But I love sharing. I love sharing music recos, book recos. And if anybody listening to this has a book you've enjoyed, send it over. Tell me about it, and maybe I'll check it out. I love sharing this type of stuff.
Speaking of music, I just want to, before we leave this chat, I want to talk about music because I know we briefly touched on live music, but first and foremost, who's your all-time favorite band?
That's a great question. That's a question I could give you a different answer for a different day.
I feel the same way when people ask me that question.
Depends on the criteria.
Yeah.
It could be Radiohead.
Yeah.
It could be the Rolling Stones. Sometimes I think it could be the Pretenders. If you want something more modern, Block Party put out an album that I've liked more than anything in the past 20 years.
Okay.
It's probably Radiohead, but it's different. I have different moods for different days.
Got you. If you were trying to get somebody, they haven't heard Radiohead ever. They're living under a rock. Who knows? And you were going to tell them one Radiohead song to listen to that would really sum up who they are and kind of maybe sway them to start listening to Radiohead. What would that song be?
I would probably just implore them to listen to the Bends start to finish. Just get it slap it on a CD if you can, or put it on your music player and drive around. Listen to it when you're unencumbered. Don't listen to it at home when you have distractions, unless you can put the headphones on and be by yourself. Just listen to this album A to Z in the order it was recorded and released and intended to be listened to. Listen to it once, A to Z, and if it misses you, it misses you, and if it hits you, it hits you. And I think a lot of people would probably find some connection with it. But I think that's an album that needs to be played in its entirety.
Excellent. Yeah. I really haven't listened to a lot of Radiohead. My friend is obsessed with Radiohead. She sings Radiohead at karaoke. I mean, she does, which sometimes isn't the best song choice at karaoke, but
what do you sing at karaoke? What's your song?
I do a lot of Fall Out Boy or Blink-182. Sometimes I will get up and do the thong song depending on how many drinks I've had.
That's funny.
Those are pretty much my go-to though. And if they have anything in any of those catalogs, usually I'm up there singing that.
Yeah, karaoke was always hard for me because a lot of my friends are actually in bands, are really good singers. So they sound good when they go up there. I generally don't. You mentioned drinks. I probably need a couple of drinks to be a karaoke. And when I go up there, I'm looking for the shortest song possible.
Yeah.
Something really short. Sometimes I'll sing a TV theme or something like that because then people, kind of laugh about it. I don't have any singing talent. I know that. Of course, it's supposed to be fun, and it's you're out there with your buddies and everything.
Yeah.
My friends might do 3 or 4 karaoke songs. I will meekly do one and then, call it a night. I was born to write, not to sing.
Well, I was born to get kicked off the stage in New Orleans when I'm doing karaoke because that happened. We did karaoke for my, we went there for my bachelorette's party, and you can't change up words or try to have fun on stage. So at the Cat's Meow, they kicked me out.
Well, if you're not thrown out of an establishment at your bachelorette party, you're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah, what album? This is interesting to me. I like to hear people's answers to this question. But what album do you think has the best album art?
Well, that's a great question, and that's something I think we've lost out. I grew up. Mm-hmm. My first music was albums, Then I started going to tape CDs, and look, it's great. Albums don't last. You need to have, it's a pain in the ass getting up, changing, flipping the album over and everything. I really like the Rumors cover.
Okay.
I like what that symbolizes, where the band was at. I would need to think about that. REM was my favorite band for a long time. A lot of the REM covers work for me. I like the Life's Rich pageant cover a lot. I'm not the hugest Eric Clapton fan, but the Layla album jacket is beautiful. Physical Graffiti is a really good cover. There are so many of them.
Yeah.
Who's Next is very much a punkish cover for who they were. Great album. And the A to Z album too. I don't think there are that many albums where every song should be played. Who's Next is one of those. Joshua Tree is a timeless album cover. There's a lot of great answers to that question.
Yeah. And you're right. It is a dying art, now that you can just listen to Spotify playlists and not pay attention to what people are doing. And when you see some really cool pictures or a really cool concept, and it's like nostalgia. Bring me back to the.
What would you say? What's your answer? I'm gonna flip it to you.
Man, I don't know. Probably any of the Kid Cudi, like Man on the Moon albums. I like his cover art a lot. So I'd probably say something.
I feel for people who don't have any album experience, in the sense that it used to, you brought the thing home, you opened it up, you were hoping there was some kind of goodie they gave with you, the liner notes or photos. If you bought like the White Album, I wasn't old enough for the White Album to be a release in my lifetime, but I bought the White Album as an album, and they had these beautiful pictures of everybody in the band. Sometimes you'd get these booklets, you'd get these really interesting things written about the band. That stuff's all out the window now. And also, albums just don't exist the way they used to. It used to be, again, as an REM fan, I really believe that REM albums were presented in a way that they wanted you to listen to the album the way it was arranged on the record. And now it's like we live in an a la carte society. Okay, I really like this one song, I'll download that song.
Yeah.
And I don't care if it's song 4, song 8, or song 12. It doesn't matter. And granted, I don't want to act like, I don't want to get off my lawn about this, because some great things happen now. We also live at a time where an artist can just decide, you know what, I did an album, I'm putting it out today at midnight. Here you go. Here's 14 new songs from Taylor Swift. Have at it. So that's really awesome. And there's so many great things about the music industry today. But I miss albums. I miss the tactileness of them, opening them up. There's a great scene in the movie Singles in the early 90s where I think they're on a date one night, and there's just a bunch of albums strewn all over the living room. They're on the floor, they're on the couch, and it's just the idea that we've listened to all this different music and it's all strewn across the living room. There's all this like musical debris. That's just a cool thing that doesn't happen anymore.
100%. I agree with that. Okay, so we're gonna head out, but before we do, can you go ahead and just, I know we touched on some of the stuff that you do. I know you do a lot of stuff. So if you could just like tell everybody where they can find you and what you're up to.
Sure. Scott_Pianowski on Twitter, where I do spend a lot of every day, maybe too much sometimes, but Twitter's still mostly a good thing. That's the best place to get me. And I welcome any kind of engagement. I welcome constructive criticism on my articles. Just try not to be too much of a, pesky about it. But you have a different opinion on what I think. I welcome that. You want to talk about a good movie you saw. You want to talk about a good dish you cooked. I'm much better of an eater than I am as a cook, but I'm trying to get better at the second thing. Want to talk about an album you liked, documentary you saw. I'm all for it. Let's talk sports. Let's talk real life. Send me a picture of your dog. We didn't mention dogs at all. I'm a big dog person.
Oh man, next time, because I'm a big dog person.
Are you? What kind of dog do you have?
We have a pit bull. He just turned 2. Mess. We have a Doberman Mastiff mix.
Oh, beautiful dog, yeah.
And then we just have a guy that's got, we did their DNA test and it says he's got boxer in him, half boxer. He doesn't look anything like a boxer. He's kind of like just a little mutt guy. So yeah. What about you? We'll talk about dogs. What about you?
Yeah. Husky Akita mix. I think there's a photo of Fenway on my Twitter account, so you can find him. So, truly man's or woman's best friend. I mean, you can't beat having a dog. And again, in a world where there's been a lot of agita this year, there's been a lot of things to be frustrated by, be troubled by. What's better than the unconditional love that you get from a dog?
Yeah, there's that meme going around right now where it's like, oh, this has been the worst year of my life. And then dogs are like, that was the best year of my
Best
life.
year of my life. Exactly right.
My family was home with me. So, yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about all kinds of good stuff. I really like talking with you about music and about, the book recommendations were great. But yeah, I really appreciate it. I know people are going to be like super jazzed when they find out that you are on.
Hey, well, thanks so much for having me.
No
It's been
problem.
really fun getting to know you
Yeah, for sure.
on Twitter for in the last year or so, and
Mm.
it's just awesome that our space is expanding to all different voices, all different
For sure.
perspectives. It's just I think we've never been smarter or more interesting as a group. You're a part of that, and it's just fun to see. The only thing that's bad about it is intimidating to me that I feel like I need to get better because there's so much good talent coming into the pool that if I don't improve my game, people are just going to be sick of me and they're going to want to listen to somebody else. But I think it's a great time to be in the fantasy space, and I'm happy to share it with you.
I appreciate it. Well, all right, guys and gals, I appreciate you listening in. And if you guys don't mind, I don't ever say this, but I will right now to rate and review because I hear that's how people find out about your stuff. So whatever, I guess that's what we're supposed to do. But anyway, until next time, I will talk to you guys later.